So thank you, Paul. Yeah, like Paul said, you know, we've been doing this a little while, but I'd like to say we're just really getting started. I've been helping to manage grain on farm and at elevators and commercial facilities for about 14 years. We use ag technology to do that. One would probably say that we spend a lot of our time watching grain dry. So it's pretty exciting. It's about like watching paint dry, if I were to say that. So how many of you guys, as we get started here, so raise a hands. How many of you guys store grain, corn, soybeans? I'm not trading. Yeah. That's a little better. Ooh. I'll let him do some adjustment there. Good? All right, thank you. So I'm not the tech guy for that stuff. So, and we could probably just talk. So I'm going to be walking around and stuff anyways. Is that okay if I walk around? All right, good. So how many of you guys store grain on the farm? Raise your hands. Corn? Soybeans? Okay, sounds good. So we're talking to the right crowd here. So a little bit about what we've done over the past few years. I've worked in development, so this is a grain monitoring evolution. After meeting Paul at the AIO, you know, he, I guess, was intrigued with what we had for technology, as well as the education that we provide to growers. And I'm going to introduce you to my team as well here in a little bit. But when we talk about how many guys are monitoring your grain, other than going up and just kind of sniffing it? A few of you guys have some monitoring systems and stuff like that out there. So we as a company, in order for us to help our growers as best we can, we use technology. We partner with AGI, so raise a hand, AGI guys. A couple of these guys here. So we partner with a manufacturer that does moisture, temperature inside of a grain bin, does automation, things like that. So this is kind of the evolution of what's happened in grain monitoring. So early temperature cables came out in about 1974. Please don't call me out on that. I'm not sure exactly what date that was. But that was when the early Boone and Rothfuss cables were out, early temperature monitoring. We noticed that it was important to monitor grain in the bin, okay? Early fan automation, this is when Eli Troyer and some other folks with Agri-Dry and then also a company out of California also came out with early fan automation. And basically that fan automation did something like this. It was either on a timer or it was on an outside weather station that turned fans on and off in accordance to the right time to run. So it was pretty primitive. In 2008, and I started with a company in 2010. In 2008, we actually invented the first moisture cable. So it was for tofu, so we're talking to the right room here. Tofu processing and then also seed processing. What we realized was at a seed facility and processing facility down near Kansas City, what we realized is that we would have a farmer and we would coach them on, you know, getting a backhoe or belt conveyor, coach them on combining practices and things like that, and then we'd put it in the bin and then we'd forget about it. So once it was in the bin, I mean, how many of you guys have a written fan automation or a written fan plan for your bins? I've wrote down, this is what I'm going to do. I bet if we go around the room here today, every one of you, you know, you might say, I'm going to run my fan for 2 weeks and then I'm going to shut it off. Run my fan for a month. I'm going to run it at night. I'm going to run it during the day. And so that's what we ran into with our grower network, was that we would put it in the bin. We wouldn't talk to the farmer about it. And then when it came time to get that seed back out of that bin, it wasn't in the condition that we wanted it to be in. And so we partnered with companies. At that time, it was these companies, and realized there was limitations. They were all temperature-based, and we never knew what was actually happening in the bin. And so the first bin managers were basically out of a need. At that point in time, we had no idea that there was a market for this kind of a product or a market for this kind of a service to help a farmer out. So we were just trying to keep the best quality seed, best quality tofu we could coming off of the farm and be able to pay that premium. Because there's nothing more frustrating as a processor to go back to a farmer and say, well, we got to pay you commercial. We can't pay you that full premium because of something ridiculous like what's going on in a bin. So fans affect that, automation affects that, how we Obviously harvest and things like that affect that. And we're going to get into that a little bit today. So I'm going to talk a little bit of education on what do we do in that bin and what should we be doing. So today, there's actually more than, and I think it's 24,000 now. These guys would correct me on that. There's a lot of systems out there. Now, I don't know how many bins there are in a lot more than that. Yeah, thank you, Ryan. So there's more bins out there still. Obviously, raise of hands. No, you guys maybe haven't even heard of these kind of systems. Now, I talk about grain monitoring because that's where I get, I teach at Iowa State 3 times a year. I do things like this quite often. If you look on YouTube, you'll see me talking a little bit about, grain education, grain management, and where we get our information from is watching data on your farm. And so we're watching temperature fronts, we're watching moisture fronts. Sarah, it's pretty exciting, right? Spend 10 hours a day watching grain dry, right? So Sarah's our lead strategic account manager, and she handles all of our larger accounts, like ConAgras of the world, Green Cover Seeds of the world, some of those guys. So that's a little bit about, this is where we get our information, guys, and we'll talk about this later. We get our information from inside of the bin, what really happens, not just a guess and by golly. So we're taking moisture temperature sensors, and these guys will be able to answer your questions on the system later on what we're doing there. Turkey River Ag, and I should probably start with that. So it's written here. Turkey River Ag is a company that I founded about a year ago. So in working with these guys at AGI, left the company, started a company called Turkey River Ag so that we can better service you on the farm. How many of you guys have ever heard of AGI or Ag Growth International? Right, several of you guys. They're a manufacturer, pretty large manufacturer. I believe you guys are the largest grain handling, right? Largest grain handling over GSI, over Sukup, over Brock. Probably not more bins than them, but the Westfield augers and the Nikos and the Batcos and stuff all add up to that. So Ryan's going to talk a little bit later because he does partnerships with people like Pence to offer you better discounts on equipment like that. So AGI, however, is a manufacturer. And when they purchased our company, our little company that had this little system out here, we had a plan, a go-to market strategy of we were direct to farm often because it's kind of hands-on. You want to be able to call and you want to get somebody, right? And so AGI has a strategy that they are a manufacturer. They want to build a good product, and they need someone out there that can service this. So that's when I went out on my own. Not at all on my own, actually, because we have a team that does this. If it was up to me, we would probably be heading down. So Turkey River Ag, what we do is we sell and we service, and then we provide education around these kind of systems. That's where we make our money. And then we partnered with a company called Veterans Vision. So we have a team of about 20 now, retired veterans that go and install and service this kind of stuff all over the U.S. How many of you guys have a grain bin dealer that you work with today? Several of you, okay. Or have built a bin in the past, or dad did, or whatever. So those guys, as a rule, and what I found over the past 14 years, they don't deal with this technology stuff that well. They maybe will handle it. You'll come to them and say, hey, I want to get a system of this sort, and they can maybe get you a quote. But as far as the long-time serviceability, where that's at, that's not a thing that they want to do. They typically want to build a bin. They want to build a really good bin, solid bin, pour the concrete right, and they want to move on because that's their bread and gravy. So part of our go-to-market strategy is we partner with your local person. They build the bin. I never want to build a grain bin. That's not what I do. And we focus on this. Our footprint is basically all of the U.S. So that's a little bit about what Turkey River does. So system, I'm not going to get into the parts of the system too much. We're taking readings out of the bin. We're taking readings out of the outside. And this is just to validate where I'm getting some of the information that I'm going to share with you guys today. So meat and potatoes. So what are we going to discuss today? These are questions over the years as I've done these kind of things. These are the questions that I get from a group like this. And so oftentimes we won't raise our hand, a group like this and ask this actual question, but what is grain conditioning? We're going to talk a little bit about what is the verbiage around grain conditioning. What does that mean? How do I choose a grain monitoring system? We'll talk about that. Why do we remove moisture, either in a bin or in a dryer? What's the purpose behind that? Why do we add moisture? That's a big one. And that was the original purpose of this system, was around quality. So how many of you guys have had soybeans that have been maybe not 13%, maybe you started at 13%, you're picking them, and at the end of the day, they're maybe 10? They get over dry. So one thing we realized early on with the system is if you wanted to make a really good tofu bean, you have to harvest the beans and then process them. And by the time you process them, if they're at 13%, 12%, 14%, somewhere in that range, they harvest and then they process a lot better, right? So the problem is getting out there and harvesting them at that, sometimes they get over dry. And every time we run them through an auger, there's more cracks, there's more splits, there's more breakage and problems with these beans. So we found a way with automated systems to take the beans that are in your bin and take them from that 9% and increase them back up to 13%. And originally, we only did it for our processing facility so that we could increase the quality. And it wasn't until we talked to some farmers and said, hey, guys, you might have a marketing strategy here. You can make some money with this as well. Because there's dollars in the bin. And every time you add water to it, legally, there's dollars in the bin. So we're going to talk about how to do that. How much does over-drying cost? You know, how many of you guys, if your dad or your grandpa, if you were to ask him, he would probably tell you that 13% corn is better than 15% corn. It's going to last longer, right? Am I right? The drier that you get it, the better. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So when should I run my fans? How much CFM do I need? So these are all real questions that I think a lot of guys have in the industry. So let's get started. So what is grain conditioning? So when you run your fans, how many of you guys have fans on your grain bin? Okay. When you run your fans, I don't know if I'm going to be nice about this, but these are the 4 reasons. If you're going to just choose to run your fans, these are the 4 reasons we should be running our fans. To run a breath of fresh air through the bin is not a good reason to run the fans, even though we maybe believe that. We want to be very intentional. We want to be on purpose. And so we either want to remove moisture, add moisture when we turn on those fans. We want to cool that grain or possibly rewarm it, okay? So that's when we talk about grain conditioning. These are the things that we're doing. So why do we want to remove moisture? Anybody? You guys are a quiet group today. Is it just me? Somebody want to share with me why we want to remove moisture in a grain bin? Save the dock. Yep, that's a good one. I like it. Yep. I mean, who likes to get a dock? Raise the hands of guys that want to take a dock at the grain elevator. No volunteers. Okay, sounds good. What else? What's another reason to dry it? Preserve your grain, no sprouts. It's kind of common sense, right? So drying, pretty easy, right? We know why we want to dry it. So this is an example. How many of you guys have seen one of these, a soybean shelf life chart, safe storage chart, soybean or corn? So if we're looking at, there's 2 things that we look at in order to know and keep the shelf life of corn and of soybeans, of any product actually. Number 1 is moisture across the top, and number 2 is temperature. So the warmer we have grain and the wetter we have grain, just like your leftovers, you leave them out, the shorter of days we have for this stuff before it spoils. And so this is just no different than your leftovers. You leave them out. If you put them in the fridge, you're okay, right? If you cool them down. So our strategy is, first we want to dry that down, whether it's through a dryer or bin or whatever, and then we want to cool it down as well. So cool it down later. You notice here in the bright green here, or the dark green here, that's greater than 1 year of safe storage. How many of you guys store corn or soybeans over a year? You guys, okay. The guy that has a monitoring system does, it looks like. So, yeah, so confidence there. So this is for 1 grade of reduction, meaning I'm taking a soybean, a number 1 soybean, and it's qualifying for a number 2 now, okay? So this is just a standard that we use, temperature and moisture. So corn, same thing, a little bit different chart. So when we are doing bin design, for instance, or if we are consulting with a grower, this is the basis for what we use, okay? This does not include if we were to run fans across it. There is a little bit different of a difference there. So you're kind of teeing it up for me here. So you mentioned a dock. So when we sit down, we actually just did this with a few of our growers. So annually, quarterly, depending on the package, depending on how we're working with a grower, we will sit down with them and we want to discuss profitability. Okay, what is the most profitable? I mean, how many of you guys have ever asked, what's the most profitable moisture content I should be shipping? And we just talked about temperature, but temperature, they don't pay you on temperature. Okay, so we're going to talk moisture on this. So what is the most profitable? And what's the second most profitable? How many of you guys on corn, this is corn, by the way, how many of you guys on corn, 15 or 15.5 probably is the most profitable, if you had to guess? What if you, in this column here is dock, so if you haul it in at 16, they kind of hit you and they beat you up on that, right? And they have profit figured in, right? There's another column here that's going to be your on-farm drying cost. So if you're using, how many of you guys are using a dryer on the farm for your corn? How many of you guys are not using a dryer? Okay, it's good to know, good to know. So there's a definite difference in, one thing I'm going to mention is, because we get asked all the time, hey, what do you guys advise for spring warm-up? You know, what should you be doing in your bin with your fans compared to what you should be doing with your fans? So some of you guys just said, I have a dryer. Some of you guys said you don't have a dryer. Your bins are probably a little bit different too. Might be I'll pick on you. What's your average size bin, bushels-wise? 30,000, okay. How about you? No storage, okay, well that's definitely different. Major difference. How about you guys? 150,000. Okay, good example. So you have a 30,000 bushel bin, natural air drying, I think you said. You're using a dryer. Should I be giving you guys the same advice, period? Probably not, right? So if I told you, hey, let's put 25% corn in your bin, I'm probably gonna get fired pretty quick here, right? So, and maybe the same with you with 25%, right? But just talking extremes. So I always laugh, you know, the soybean associations, they come to us as an example, other media, hey, what do you guys advise guys should do with their fans this time of year? Well, I've got 50 different advice here, but I have to ask them some questions. If you guys stick around for this afternoon, we're going to do a deep dive on each and every one of your farms, and we're going to go through that. And I guarantee you, it'll be about an hour and a half after lunch. And so I guarantee you get benefit out of it. So we're going to split out into groups and have some fun with that if you want to stick around. But then there's three things that we need to think about. What is our dock? When do they start docking? What is our actual true drying cost on the farm? Okay, whether it's with a fan. So if you're running a fan, it might be 2 cents per bushel. If you're running a dryer on the last few points, it might be 6 to 8 cents a bushel. Those of you guys that have a dryer probably opened your eyes and said, well, I don't know if it's really all that, right, with my dryer. If you look at any dryer schematic and you go from 25% down to 15%, dryer efficiency is increased the wetter you go. Okay, so the last points always come off the hardest. So there's different strategies we can do about that. So the last points typically are 6 to 8 cents, so from 16 down to 15. But if you jump back up, that upped from 25 to 24. I mean, how many of you guys are probably the phantom yield loss thing, right? How many of you guys are probably trying to avoid some of that, getting out there early? From 25 to 24, we've got a huge efficiency. It's barely costing us anything to dry that, okay? But once we get to the last few points, it's hard to dry it, and sometimes we overshoot. Now, I'm going to tell you something. My expertise, and I don't have a lot of them, I have one expertise, is in bin, and that's what this group. That's if you want to talk about what happens when we start in a bin and finish in a bin, we know it as good as anybody because we see it, and we see X-ray vision in several bins, several hundred bins a year, 1,000 bins a year probably for Sarah. So she does an awful lot of this in the background. So the other thing we need to look at is so our drying cost, but then also shrink. Who can tell me what true shrink on corn is? This really affects your bottom line, by the way, so it's an important number. So shrink on corn, true shrink on corn is 1.176. And my next question is that the number that your elevator told you? Why? Why wouldn't he tell you that number? And I'm not saying they're being mischievous at all, but they can make money. Yeah, they need to store. And in fairness, they probably want you to deliver as many bushels as you can at harvest. I'm not the marketing guy. He's going to talk a little bit later. He's going to help you out with that. But they want you to deliver bushels at harvest because 10 years out of 10, they're going to make 25% on your dollar. And that's okay. They make a profit. Profit's good. And you guys should profit too. But true shrink is 1.176 on corn. True shrink on soybeans is 1.33. So that means for every point, if I'm delivering 13% soybeans, that's 1.33%. It's basically shrink is defined as this, guys. So it's on a wet basis, so I'm going to get a little nerdy here, but it's on a wet basis. So basically what it is it's converting the volume to weight. Otherwise, it'd be 1-to-1. It'd be 1% is 1% if it's just volume. But now we're converting it to weight because there's a difference between dry matter and wet matter. So 1.176, 1.33, that's the math we're going to go through this afternoon. But it's some pretty important math because here's what happens. We're factoring those three things in here, and we're talking corn. I know we're kind of in a room of soybean guys, but this affects your whole farm, right? So we need to talk about that. 16% corn, if I factor those three things, now this is on $6 corn. I did this a while ago on this one. I should probably revise it. I don't create the markets either, by the way, guys. So if you need to kick me out, I'm just glad we're not on the second floor. So $6 corn, 16% corn you're gonna yield 573. I don't talk about any of your other inputs. I'm just talking about storage. What's the dock, drying cost, and shrink? If you're taking it from 18 down to 16, it's 573. 15% corn, this is where it gets really interesting if we really break it down on our farm, and I want to do that on every one of your farms. This is a simple calculator because I can't do things complex. I have to break everything down to the cob, okay? That's how I like to look at everything. Probably annoying to some of these guys, but let's oversimplify this for Dave. So take 15% corn, it's 572. Here's the thing. If I think about, and now this is a gentleman with a 33,000 bushel bin, and he gets 8-cent dock, and it costs him 2 cents to dry it. He's just as well off, almost, to deliver 16% corn versus 15. But why is he upset about delivering 16% corn? I have a question. Anybody, pick on anybody. They're still docking him. But because of the penny. Why else? The elevator will blend it. Yeah, so he knows they're taking it anyways. But it's only a penny. This is the same price, Bowen, right? I think, and this is what I think we're emotional human beings. And I think when we get a dock on that thing, we know it's costing us money. We don't always know how much, and it makes us angry. We produce a good product, and they're giving us a dock on this, and they're penalizing it. And they're doing that for a reason, because like you said, they're going to blend it. Because what happens, so that's the first load out of the bin. What's the last load out of the bin look like? What's the percentage of the last load out of your guys' bin? 17, you said? 13, okay, yep. So 13, okay. Let's look at that. So if we get down to 14% now, keep in mind the only factor, we're not talking about dock anymore. The only factor is it could be efficiencies, it could be things, it could be all of us knowing the shelf life chart before, knowing that dry grain is good grain and it'll last longer. True. So we're running our fans or we're possibly overshooting in the dryer. And keep in mind, Like I said earlier, I know what happens in the bin. All I know is what happens that came out of the dryer. You guys are all better dryer operators than I am, so I won't get into that conversation. But we could possibly, with the confidence of what we have in the bin, the airflow that we have, back up that process and create a less of a bottleneck in the dryer at harvest, as well as potentially create efficiencies here. And so this is the efficiency. So you see it start to tank. So that's 10 cents less than 16. So 16% corn. Now, 16.1, that's no fun, right? 15.1, you get into that next point. I get that. But to make easy decisions, I like to break everything down to the cob. 14% corn is less good than 16% corn, except for it doesn't last as long in the bin. Financially, it's better. And then I brought it down to 12% for the fun of it, 544. So we're losing money fast. I'm no marketing genius, but we can make this through efficiencies on the farm, things that we can control. So this is an elevator that has our system. And luckily, Sarah's taking care of these guys and changing their habits, right? So this is a 100,000 bushel bin. The bottom 16 feet, because they've got some good sized fans on this bin, they run it. Off to the left side of this first chart, you can see every day in the yellow is when they ran fans. They have a management strategy, maybe. Do they have a management strategy? She's shaking her head, no. So the elevator, a lot of times these elevators, they have 18 sites, and they got somebody running the site that's maybe been there a year. And they just say, well, we need to run the fans. We need to get this done. And so they ran the fans for a month, and then they started automating after that in the green. You can see that. So in the bottom 16 feet, dried to 12%, this cost them 2,200 bushels of water. I converted it to bushels of water. Once we set it to auto, and you can see the moisture chart over here, the orange, fixate on the orange one, it got really dry, and then it started picking up just a little bit. In average, this bin gained about a 1.4%, not about, but right at 1.4%. So they gained a lot of money by being able to pull that back. What we see, once we get data points in bins, we see this happen, and we create efficiencies, and we start to work with the growers, work with the elevators. So, there's something fuzzy about that? Oh, there we go. That was me. So, there is a typo on the next slide too. So just as an FYI, that's on me. But how many of you guys have ever seen Iowa State's? And I'll get off of corn here in a second, but I think it's important. How many of you guys have seen Iowa State's combination air dry article? So those of you that have a dryer, so I'm talking to dryer guys again still. So we take 100,000 bushel of corn, scenario 1, and the grower uses a high temp dryer. We remove 5 points of moisture. That's what scenario 1 is going to be here. Scenario 2, 100,000 bushels of corn, high temp dryer, but things happen. That 100,000 bushel, and we'll just use that for easy math, we go from 20 to 13. Whether it's a dryer mistake that happens, by the way, out of your control, whether it's a dry aeration thing, whatever. And so scenario 3, that's actually out of the dryer. Scenario 3, we're going to go from 20%, same thing, we're going to go to 17. And the reason we maybe don't go a little higher is because we're in fear of that, over drying. So how do we solve this? And then we condition down to the 15. So we're going to utilize the bin to finish off the rest of it. Now, I don't want to make this recommendation until I understand your markets, till I understand that you have a 150,000 bushel bin and you have a 30,000 bushel bin and different CFMs. But this is a concept and a strategy that we can use. That's supposed to say scenario 3, by the way. So scenario 1 that I just talked about, there's all the math up there. We can go through that later or on your farm. $20,000. Scenario 2, overdrying those 2 points cost us $40,000. And scenario 3, or 4 written in here, doing a combination air dry. So basically what this means is if you're coming out of a dryer, that's one science. If you're doing a dry aeration, taking heat energy, how many of you guys do dry aeration in here with your corn? Probably didn't know we were going to talk about corn at all. Paul's telling me, get off talking about corn, let's talk about soybeans. So how many of you guys do dry aeration? Tempering in the bin at all? No? Everybody cooling into the bin for the most part? Yeah, okay. So That's some of what we're talking about, but if you have heat energy in that corn, you're taking some of that heat energy, but once you're left with ambient corn, we have to have a strategy and enough CFM to be able to cover the cost of that and take care of that. So just creating efficiencies. So, whoops, I'm going backwards. Here we go. So let's get back onto something. Why do we want to add moisture? The drying thing's kind of easy. Okay. Drying thing's kind of easy. Why would we want to add moisture? It's a small group, guys. We can share. Money. Yep. Why wouldn't we want to add moisture? Why wouldn't we? Can't store for longer than a year. Yeah. Yep. So you guys knew all this going into this. So how many of you guys have any concerns? Usually when I talk about soybeans, let's shift to soybeans now, okay? There's two types of people, or maybe two reasons, I guess. So I can do the same presentation. Larry, Josh, those guys can go out to a farm, do the same presentation to two different farmers. And one farmer says, yeah, I'd probably like to do an automated system, and I want to protect my corn. And we go later that day, we go to another farmer, and he says, yeah, I think I want to make some money and put this on my soybean bin. And so there's two, that could be different mentality of different farmers that day. It could be the mood they're in, whatever. It could be the markets. I don't know. That I don't know. But what I see often, and we're going to go through the math on this in a little bit here, but what I see often is guys buy this and they want to hydrate their soybeans, okay? So this is an example. Up near me, I'm out of Cresco, Iowa. So this is an example up near me of an actual bin that cut off just last week. So most hydration gets done in the spring. So this individual had ran, this is a 50,000 bushel bin. He's got not a lot of CFM in this bin. So it's a 50,000 bushel bin, not a lot of CFM. He's been set to auto hydrate, and you can see a little bit of some fine tuning here. This graph, you can't see a whole lot with it. He's increased 0.7%, not even a point. Most of his increase will be happening pretty soon here. Now, he's already gained about $5,200 in this bin. So this is just an example bin. We do this with every one of our growers. This just happens to be the most recent one I just ran. Here's another bin, 21,000 bushel bin. Now you can see a little more dramatic here. So that's probably the difference between your bin and his bin back there. You're able to see the difference. So all of these beans came in. They're probably 11, 12, right around there, 10%. And now we're inching towards that 12 and a half, okay? Actually, it says average 9.9. This guy made about $6,300 in this bin. Usually when I start talking about this, most people are, whether you're willing to ask or not, are thinking, okay, number one, how is that possible? And number two, aren't we going to break a bin? Beans are going to expand. We're talking about expanding soybeans inside of a grain bin. And so that was my first question to Don Schaefer, the guy who created this technology, is why are we not going to break a bin when we do this, and how does this work? So I'm going to start with one thing. How does this work? So if you run your fans constantly throughout the day, there's going to be an up and a down, so in the red here. The humidity is going to rise, or what we call EMC is going to rise. How many of you guys have ever heard of equilibrium moisture content? Those guys back there, okay? So basically this, if you take a soybean and you put it in this room, if the soybean's wetter than the room, what's it going to do? It's going to eventually dry out and become like the room. So 18% soybean is going to become 13%. We're not blowing a fan on it, adding heat or anything. It's just going to happen naturally. Happens out in your field, whether you like it or not. What if we take a 8% soybean and put it in the same room, same air? What happens to that? That's going to go up and go to 13%. So all we're doing, so we're going to start and stop fans, because how many of you guys all live near here, northern Indiana, how many during the day is the weather always the same? So it picks up in the morning, it dries off in the afternoon, but then tomorrow it's different, right? We just noticed that the other day with the cold front. So what happens here is in the beginning of the day, it's too dry. we may have run our fans before in this too dry, thinking, hey, we need to get this done or we need to cool or whatever. That's what costs us money in the beginning here. So this is my chart, so it's probably not done very well. I need to have my marketing crew do that. But off to the left here is EMC, or let's just equate it to higher relative humidity or lower relative humidity, EMC, meaning that number is going to make soybeans that number. Okay, so let's say we're targeting 14. And then in this bandwidth, we're going to pick a bandwidth because you can't get 13% air all the time. You're going to have to run in a bandwidth of air. So it will turn on and off the fans. In this green, it's going to pick up as it comes into there. And then when it gets too wet, it's going to then shut down the fans because it's too wet to pick up. So that's how we do it, okay? I always struggled. It took me like 6 months. I'm a little slower than some of these guys. It took me like 6 months to figure out, okay, so we're pointing fans in at the bottom, and the air's coming out the top. It's always going to be over dry on the bottom then. And it took me a long time to figure out that's not true. It's the type of air we're running. If we on soybeans ran 13% air across the bottom all the time, it would never over dry that. It would just work its way up and we'd have 13% beans the whole time. It's the type of air. That bigger bin, that 50,000 bushel bin I showed you just a little bit ago, actually, and that's why you couldn't see the needle move, it actually, he put in 13% beans on the bottom. They never moved. But the middle of the bin was at 9%, and that all picked up to 13. That front moved right up through that bin. So this is how it works. Now, why don't we break a bin? We're increasing 1% in volume per point. And so when I asked Don about that, why don't we break a bin? And he said, well, the truth is you can. So now you guys are going to kick me out. If you have a bin and the grain depth, the sidewall height of that bin, you need to leave room in the top of that bin if you're setting something to auto-hydrate. Now, I don't want you guys all to leave here and say, I'm going to run the fans when it's raining. I heard this guy. I'm going to run the fans when it's raining. You're probably not going to be happy when you pull the beans out, right? It's a very, very scientific process. But Rotor Land and Cattle out of Nebraska, one of our early customers, and this would have been back in 2010. I drove out there, seasonally, and we actually went into it. It's a 48 9-ring bin, so about a 50,000 bushel bin, 50,000, and we had soybeans in this bin, all for food grade. And so inside of that bin, I drew marks on the sidewall as the beans went up, and we pushed up a half a ring in that bin. Now another thing, so I was in our office, and I was managing the north, and this guy was managing the south, and he took a call from a guy. Said, well, hey, this Mississippi guy, how many Mississippi guys we got here? Okay, so I think they're a little different down there. I'll just say that. So we're listening to him on the phone, and we said, well, how's things going? Oh, this is working great, man. We're hydrating. We got beans rolling out of our vent. Shut it down. We're doing too much. You need to leave room in the bin. So it works. But I tell you what, yeah, we always have a saying, we work with a lot of Missouri folks. We always have a saying that if you took the southern third of Iowa and sold it to Missouri, both IQs would increase. But Missouri folks don't like that, probably, do they? Yeah, you say the same thing about Arkansas, though, right? Yeah, oh, listen. Breaking out the boxing gloves now, So basically what happens, and back to the nerdy science of it, is it's vapor pressure. It's either going to release or absorb, and it happens with all commodities. We work with like Wonderful Pistachio. We work with a lot of dry bean, edible bean companies. It's very important to these companies, cover seeds, things like that we have safe storage around these. And that's what means something to us. There's profitability around it for you guys as well. So how do I choose a grain monitoring system? We'll talk about that a little bit later. And part of the reason we're here, so I'll just lead with that. Part of the reason we're here is we have a passion we work with commercial clients. So about 2 years with a company, I did this, and Ryan does this now. So we would partner with your buyer, okay? And we would partner with your buyer to understand what are their needs coming off the farm, okay? When they get a product from you, what does it look like? Should we just put a bunch of these systems in their bins? We partnered with somebody years ago, and I won't say who it is, and we showed them this hydration thing, and they said, huh, that's pretty awesome. We need to build bins and buy it direct off the farm, and we're going to do all the hydrating. Well, some of that happened, right? And so they built an infrastructure there, but that's expensive. So what we did is we looked at how does a digital elevator look? This is all online. We get it to our phone, we work through it. What if we went back to the farm and offered it to them and offered incentives and did some things that way? And so we go out to the farm and we talk about different fans and setups and what can we do to move the needle for you guys so that when you guys deliver, you guys make the money on it, okay? So that's why we're here today, and we're going to talk a little bit about that this afternoon. But when you choose grain monitoring, by the way, if you get AGI guys could plug your ears, Turkey River handles all of the different grain monitoring and managing products out there. Okay, so I don't care what brand it is, we handle it. Now, the I don't care what brand it is affects us though. So if you're just looking for a temp cable, we get you an inexpensive temp cable. If you're looking for automation, however, we need to have something that works. These guys are not the cheapest, but they're the only one that we will represent for that. We service some of the others, but we don't sell it. Okay, so just to give you a heads up and a little validation for these guys. So some truths about grain monitoring systems. And I've heard some of this. I've heard salesmen come out to farms, and how many of you guys have ever went to a trade show or a farm show? Did you know that if you bought everything at that farm show, you would increase your yield and your profitability by like 1,000%? Just buy it. So there's a lot of fluff out there. Don't agree with it, and it has to make sense. And you got to be willing to walk away and say, you know what, this doesn't make sense for us. And that's part of the integrity behind everything that we all should do. Sensors in a grain bin don't read a radius. Someone will probably tell you that. Okay, that you've got a sensor and it reads a 10-foot radius. No, they're put in a 10-foot radius. They don't zap the grain over here and then understand what's going on, right? They might send you a text message when it's a 5-degree rise within a 5-day period saying, hey, we've got warming grain. It's a hot spot. You need to pay attention to it. But that hot spot could be over here and not here. Automation does not put turbos on fans. How big a fan do you have on your 150,000 bushel bin? 15 horse. How big a fan you got on your, you said 30,000 or something? 2 10s on a 30,000. What? 215. Same size fan almost when you're talking this much. Which one do you think can perform 5 points of moisture compared to maybe 1 point of moisture, right? Okay, you're taking, if I were to tell you, let's go get the 5 points, we're trying to hook our half ton up to our hay trailer and something's gonna break, right? So it's not gonna work. So we're not putting turbos on fans, but we do need to meet, because here's what happens, is we go out to the farm and we find out, well, this bin over here, we're underutilizing it. This can take some pressure off the dryer. Or you can actually hydrate 3 points in this bin. Or here's an interesting thing. So we were working with a seed company that actually they pay a 20-cent premium for this system, okay? For us to go out, kick tires, work with them. And so we're doing something similar here. And so when we get out to the farm, we take a look at what does your fan do, what can it do, and what can it do. And usually first year with a grower, so I like to skip the second year, but usually first year with a grower, we'll have a grower that will say, yeah, let's hydrate my soybeans. Second year, we get a hard look at their fan. We possibly put a heater on it, and I'll discuss that a little bit later. Second year, we'll actually harvest a little bit wetter soybeans, and we'll get the same ROI with that, but they couldn't have done that if they didn't know what they had in that bin and what that bin could actually do. So I sign up for these because I'm always looking for what's out there, a weekly broad grain management email or a blast. I get one from a company that they sell a system. It's a trinket that goes on a bin. It's a $500 deal. And they have advice every week on when you should run your fans. So it's broad brushstroke. Like last week, they had a thing out there that said, you need to run your fans on this night and this night to cool it down. Now, they never asked, I'm in Iowa, They never asked if I was in Iowa or Indiana. Same email went out to everybody. They never asked whether it was corn or soybeans. They never asked whether you still have some 17% corn in your bin and you're trying to finish it off and you're all dry. I'm just picking on you guys. Those questions need to be asked before we give advice. So those things don't work, okay? Temperature tells you when you have a problem. Temperature tells you when you have a problem, and moisture tells you before you have a problem. Got several examples where I've seen something come into a bin, let's pick on corn, and I see a 17% pocket in that bin. I'm not going to argue whether that's the grain or the fines, because our sensor doesn't actually know the difference, whether it's grain or if it's fines. But there's something wet in there. And 2 months down the road, that's the sensor that calls you, sends you a text message, and what does it say to you, Larry, that text message? Got a hot spot. So now we've got an 80-degree thing and the rest of the bin's 40. Now, I don't know about you guys. I'm typically fairly high energy. You could ask these guys. But if I were to get a hot spot alert that says, I've got a hot spot in that bin, what are you guys going to do? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to run out and turn the fans on. Here's what we don't want to do, is run out and just turn the fans on, because it might be 60 degrees outside, the whole bin's 40, and we got an 80-degree hot spot in this spot. We just made the whole problem worse. So automation watches for that, people, and Sarah's going to share a little bit later about what our people do when they're sitting there watching grain and how that works. I've been told I need to wrap up here pretty soon, and I think I've done it fairly well on time. I'm going to show some live bin data later, not today or not right now. So a little bit later, we're going to go through an actual grain bin and show you guys some examples of what really happens. I'll hook to the Wi-Fi and get that done. But as I wrap up, these are some of the reasons that I hear of why did I build a grain storage. And so when we're talking about bin design, so I always like number C. It's kind of so. But a lot of times A and B are real, as well as D, right? We want to have control. We want to control our markets. I heard recently, we were just on farm, Larry, gentlemen, there's an ADM or something, and I'm not from the area, but there's always something local happening. So there's a market that's gone away, and now they need to build bins so that they can protect their assets and what they're doing. So now they've got a problem, now a good problem, but now they need to build bins and design it. We helped them design those bins and redesign that, right, yesterday. So letter A, so let's focus on that. Typically, that's the end of the line. So when I build a grain bin, typically I need 30,000 bushels, I need 20, 60, you name the number, and that's the end of the questions, except for how cheap can I get it? How cheap can I get this bushels? If you go to your bin dealer, he's going to tell you, well, if you add another ring, that's the cheapest ring you'll ever put on. You might as well add 2 more, 3 more. And so it kind of goes to letter C. My neighbor had a bigger or taller bin than me. But here's the problem with that. That may not do what you're trying to do on the farm. And I would argue through data and through math that your next ring up is always your hardest to condition ring. I'm not saying don't build a tall, big bin, but do it purposely and with intention. Your next ring up is your hardest to condition and is the most expensive to condition. And over a 5-year period, you're going to pay for that ring more than if you were to keep it a little bit shorter and work on more bins. Now, I say that, and keep in mind, I'm the smart aleck behind the computer saying that. I don't know your farm. I don't know how much real estate you have to move around, your situation. So there's a lot of that going on, right? But if, for instance, you came to me and said, okay, I've got, and I'm making up numbers, I've got 50,000 bushels of soybeans. Typically, they're 9%, ranging from 9%, and I'd like to get out and harvest a little bit earlier, take some pressure off of my corn harvest. What can I do there? It's really hard to run these through the dryer. We might design bins so that speeds up harvest, that recoups the math, on the 9%, and do that intentionally to begin with. The best scenario we have, now, we're going to look at your current bins to see what do you have, what does work and what doesn't work. Then we're also going to look at if you have future projects, best thing I ever have is people call me and say, hey, I need 30,000 bushel bin. I know you know my goals, Dave. Design it for me around aeration. Now, I won't tell you what auger to put on and how to do all that, but aeration, that's what we do. So that's all done through a safe storage assessment. We drop, number one, we take a look at your current bins and we drop them into a bucket to kind of put common sense to this. Are you tempering a bin off to the right? You're just aeration, which means I'm just controlling the temperature. However, affecting the moisture on the bottom of that bin, down to that 12%. Am I dry aeration, which this is cover your rear air. So it's enough airflow to maybe move a point in the bin, so on and so forth, or it's drying. And so that's the first thing we do on the farm is drop each bin into that bucket. And we're gonna find out, how many of you guys have got a mix of bins on the farm? Mix of bin sizes? I was literally out on the farm. I've told this story forever, and I've never had a farmer tell me the story. I've just seen it. And we were out there, and he goes, yep, those are the ones Dad built. They were about this tall. This is the one I built. They were about this tall. Those are the ones my son built. 500,000 bushel bins, right? And so that's why they call it a cluster. You know, we built a leg, and we got to get that spout over to that other bin. Now we're only building this wide and whatever, right? So you've got a mix of bins, and each bin should have its own what can we do in that bin, right? Because each bin has its own capabilities. So we'll go through that, aeration inspection, ROIs, things like that. So guys, please be safe. We're affiliated with a lot of the different safety companies and things like that throughout the US, and we hear about all the deaths on the farm, things like that. Number one reason, engulfment, entrapment, any of that kind of stuff, and I speak, you know, at the local FFAs, the local Iowa State extensions and things like that on the safety, and I've known people personally that have died in a bin, you know, shoveling it. I'm not gonna get into those stories because we're gonna stay positive today, but the number one reason we have issues in a bin is because there was a problem in that bin. We had a grain issue, and now we're climbing in. Be it there's too much CO2 and we can't breathe because there's no oxygen, happened in Waverly, Iowa, or we've got a pile and we're shoveling into that. I get a little emotional about it, but we've got a pile and we're shoveling into that and that collapses on us. And it's something we've done all the time, and we've all done, by the way. We have a zero entry policy, and then I always joke that, well, I climbed in that bin and put marks on the sidewall, right? So we got to be careful, okay? So be safe out there, guys. A little serious there, but be safe. We're going to have a little fun later on this afternoon, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to get Ryan up here. He's a lot more fun than I am. But we're going to talk about some discounts that we offer because of Pence. We're going to talk about a grower program that we offer and a storage program, basically a digital elevator for them, but also almost no risk to the farm out there with a lot of gain. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and break out. We could do it with all of you, I think, with a group of us, but we do like a facilitation instead of me just talking, and we'll break out into groups on tables here, and we're going to talk about your farm, and we'll run scenarios on your farm and get a better understanding of that, and you'll leave with a better understanding of what you can do. So anybody wants to stick around this afternoon, we're going to have some fun with that. So with that said, Cammie told me I had 5 minutes about 10 minutes ago. Any questions? I am going to be around all day, so we can answer questions a little bit later too. So any questions? All right. It's uphill from here, guys.